The bioship that served as the plague's primary vector was a nightmare made manifest, a writhing mass of corrupted tissue the size of a small moon floating in the dead space between star systems. Jake Morrison stood in the command chamber of Queen Lysara's personal vessel, watching the monstrous thing grow larger on their screens as they approached what every tactical manual would call certain death. "Final readings confirm our analysis," reported Dr. Helen Brooks, who had arrived 3 days earlier aboard the fastest ship Earth could send. "The plague ship is definitely the source. Every infection vector we have tracked leads back to this location." Alex Carter stood beside Jake, his expression grim but determined. "I still think this plan is insane. We are flying directly into the mouth of the thing that has been destroying entire star systems." "That is why it might work," Jake replied, though his own confidence was not as strong as his voice suggested. "The plague expects us to attack from outside with superior firepower. It does not expect us to volunteer to be consumed." Queen Lysara swam through the command chamber's water-filled sections, her bioluminescent patterns showing the controlled fear of someone trying to project confidence while facing the unknown. "All ships report ready, Captain Morrison." "Are you certain about the timing?" Jake checked his calculations one more time. The plan depended on precise coordination between dozens of factors, most of which they could not control. "As certain as anyone can be about something that has never been attempted before." The approach took 6 hours, and with each passing minute, the plague ship revealed more of its horrifying nature. What had once been a beautiful Nereid biovessel had been transformed into something that seemed to exist solely to spread corruption and death. Tendrils hundreds of miles long reached out into space, each one pulsing with infected tissue that glowed with sick light. "Incoming transmission," Navigator Reef announced. "The plague ship is communicating." The message that came through their systems was not words or images, but pure malevolent intent translated into sound. It was the voice of a disease given consciousness, and it spoke with absolute confidence of inevitable victory. "We know what you are," the plague said. "We have studied your methods, your tactics, your weaknesses. You cannot surprise us. You cannot defeat us. Surrender now, and your corruption will be swift." Jake activated the communication system. "This is Captain Morrison of Earth. We are here to negotiate terms of surrender." The plague's response was immediate and filled with satisfaction. "Finally, wisdom. You will be absorbed into our collective. Your biological distinctiveness will be added to our own." "We accept your terms," Jake said, ignoring the horrified expressions of the Nereid crew. "We are transmitting our approach. Vector now." Queen Lysara's patterns shifted to what Jake had learned meant trust, despite fear. She was gambling everything on his plan, even though it went against every instinct her people possessed. The plague ship's tendrils reached out to, embraced their small fleet, pulling them into what appeared to be docking bays within the creature's massive body. Jake felt the ship shudder as they were drawn inside, and the view screens showed corridors of corrupted flesh stretching away in all directions. "Phase 1 complete," Alex whispered. "We are inside the belly of the beast." "Now comes the hard part," Jake replied. Once inside the plague ship, they discovered that Jake's guess had been correct. The plague was supremely confident in its ability to corrupt any biological system it encountered. It had grown complacent, expecting all visitors to follow predictable patterns of resistance that it could easily overcome. But Jake's team was not following predictable patterns. Instead of trying to resist the plague's influence, they allowed themselves to be partially infected while secretly deploying the chaotic defense systems they had developed. The plague began its standard corruption process, expecting to convert the newcomers into extensions of itself within hours. Instead, it encountered something it had never faced before: biological systems that fought back in completely random ways. Dr. Brooks had modified her own immune system using the hybrid human Nereid technology they had developed. When the plague tried to infect her, her chaotic defenses responded by attacking everything in sight, including parts of her own body. The plague, programmed to expect logical resistance, could not adapt to a defense system that attacked the wrong targets with random intensity. "It is working," she reported through their secure communication system. "The plague is pulling back from my position. It cannot predict what my immune system will do next." Alex had volunteered for an even more dangerous modification. His nervous system had been altered to include Nereid biotechnology that responded to stress in unpredictable ways. When the plague tried to take control of his mind, it encountered thoughts that changed direction randomly, emotions that shifted without cause, and decision-making processes that ignored logic entirely. "This is very weird," Alex reported. "I can feel the plague trying to get into my head, but every time it thinks it understands how I think, my brain does something different." But the real test came when the plague encountered Queen Lysara herself. She had undergone the most extensive modifications, allowing her natural Nereid biology to be influenced by human immune system principles while maintaining her own consciousness. When the plague tried to corrupt her, it met a defense system that was simultaneously highly advanced and completely chaotic. The plague's confusion was transmitted throughout its network, creating cascading failures in its ability to process new information. For the first time since its creation, it encountered opponents whose responses it could not predict or counter. Jake and his team used this confusion to penetrate deeper into the plague ship, following corridors of infected tissue, toward what their sensors indicated was the creature's central consciousness. They encountered other absorbed bioships along the way, vessels that had been transformed into extensions of the plague's will. "Look at this," Dr. Brooks said, examining one of the corrupted ships. "The plague has not destroyed these vessels. It has integrated them into its own structure. Every ship it captures becomes part of its collective intelligence. That means every tactical database, every strategic algorithm, every piece of military knowledge from the ships it has absorbed is now part of the plague's decision-making process," Queen Lysara observed. "No wonder it can anticipate Nereid responses so accurately." Jake studied the infected vessel, noting how its organic systems had been rewired to serve the plague's purposes. "But that also means it is thinking like a combination of all the species it has absorbed. It has become too logical, too systematic." "What do you mean?" "It has absorbed the knowledge of dozens of highly advanced civilizations, all of which approach problems through systematic analysis and logical planning. The plague has become a perfect strategic mind, which means it has the same weakness as any perfect system." "Which is?" Jake smiled grimly. "It cannot handle true randomness." They reached the plague's central consciousness chamber, a vast space, filled with pulsing neural networks that stretched in all directions. At the center floated a mass of tissue that appeared to be the plague's brain, if such a term could be applied to something so alien. The plague consciousness spoke to them, directly, its voice filling their minds without the need for communication devices. "You have come far, but you cannot resist us. We have absorbed the knowledge of 100 species. We know every tactic, every strategy, every weapon that has ever been used against us." "That is your problem," Jake replied, stepping forward despite every instinct telling him to run. "You know too much. Explain. You have become a perfect strategic mind by absorbing all that systematic knowledge, but perfection has a weakness. It cannot adapt to true chaos." Jake activated the final phase of his plan. Hidden throughout the plague ship, his team had been deploying modified viruses based on human immune system principles, but these were not designed to attack the plague directly. Instead, they were programmed to introduce random elements into the plague's decision-making processes. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the plague. Its perfect neural networks, designed to process information logically and efficiently, began encountering data that made no sense. Random commands appeared in its control systems. Strategic algorithms received input that violated all logical parameters. Decision trees branched into outcomes that contradicted basic cause and effect. "What are you doing to us?" the plague demanded, its voice showing confusion for the first time. "Teaching you what humans learned long ago," Jake replied. "Sometimes, the best solution is not the logical one." Dr. Brooks activated her part of the plan, releasing a cloud of modified organisms that carried human genetic patterns throughout the plague ship. These organisms did not attack the plague's systems directly, but instead introduced elements of human biological chaos into its perfectly ordered structure. The plague tried to adapt, but every time it developed a response to one chaotic element, 10 more appeared in completely unrelated parts of its network. Its consciousness evolved to handle logical threats through systematic analysis, could not cope with opponents whose actions defied systematic understanding. The research facility was located in the deepest part of the palace complex, where the water pressure was so intense that only the strongest bioarchitecture could survive. Jake Morrison followed researcher Thane through corridors lined with specimens that made his skin crawl. Samples of the void plague were contained in specialized chambers that pulsed with warning lights, their contents writhing like living nightmares. Thane was the most brilliant biological engineer in the Nereid Empire, according to Queen Lysera, and his attitude toward Jake made that very clear. The Nereid scientists' bioluminescent patterns rarely shifted from the colors that Jake had learned meant irritation and skepticism. I do not understand why Queen Lysera believes a primitive species can solve problems that have defeated our greatest minds, Thane said as they entered the main laboratory. Your people have barely mastered genetic modification, while we have been perfecting biological integration for millennia. Jake looked around the lab, impressed despite Thane's attitude. Living computers grew from the walls like coral formations, their surfaces covered with data that shifted and flowed like schools of luminescent fish. Research stations were actually symbiotic organisms that responded to the scientists' touch, growing new instruments as needed. Maybe that is exactly the problem, Jake said quietly. Excuse me? You have been perfecting biological integration for millennia. That means you have rules, traditions, established ways of doing things. This plague seems designed to exploit exactly that kind of systematic thinking. Thane's patterns flared brighter with annoyance. Our methods are proven. They are based on thousands of years of scientific advancement. We do not work randomly or chaotically like some species. Jake ignored the insult and moved to examine one of the plague specimens. The thing in the containment chamber looked like cancer, given intelligence, a mass of corrupted tissue that pulsed with malevolent life. How does it spread? It infiltrates biological systems through microscopic vectors that mimic beneficial, symbiotic organisms. Once inside, it begins converting the host's biological technology into versions of itself. And your countermeasures? Thane activated a holographic display showing the Nereid's research efforts. We have tried biological barriers, immune system boosters, targeted toxins, genetic modification of our technology to make it resistant, and complete system purges. Every approach has eventually failed. Jake studied the data, noting the methodical progression of their experiments. Each countermeasure was logical, well-planned, and thoroughly tested. Each one had worked initially before the plague adapted to overcome it. What if the problem is not that your countermeasures are wrong, but that they are too predictable? Predictable? Thane's patterns shifted to confusion. Look at this progression. Each experiment follows logically from the previous one. If I were an intelligent opponent studying your methods, I could probably guess what you were going to try next. The plague is not intelligent. It is a biological weapon, possibly artificially created, but it operates on instinct and adaptation. Jake, move to another display showing the plague's evolution over time. Are you sure about that? Because this looks like learning to me, not just adaptation. For the first time, Thane's patterns showed something other than annoyance. Explain. Adaptation is reactive. An organism encounters a threat and develops resistance over time through trial and error. But look at these patterns. Jake pointed to specific data points. The plague is developing countermeasures to your defenses before you implement them. That is not adaptation, that is anticipation. Thane studied the data more carefully, his patterns shifting to deep concentration. You are suggesting the plague can predict our research directions? I am suggesting that maybe it understands how you think. Your research follows logical principles that anyone familiar with Nereid science could anticipate. What if we tried something completely unpredictable? Such as? Jake had been thinking about this since his conversation with Queen Lysera. What do you know about human immune systems? Very little. Human biology is primitive compared to our enhanced organisms. Primitive maybe, but also chaotic. Human immune systems do not work logically. They try random things, make mistakes, attack the wrong targets, and somehow still manage to fight off diseases that should kill us. Thane's patterns showed skepticism. Chaos is inefficient. Our biological systems are designed for optimal performance. And that optimization makes them predictable. What if we tried to make your defenses less optimal and more chaotic? Over the following days, Jake worked with Thane and his research team to develop something the Nereids had never attempted. Deliberately, inefficient biological defenses. Instead of creating perfect barriers against the plague, they designed systems that would respond randomly, sometimes overreacting, sometimes underreacting, sometimes attacking the wrong targets entirely. Thane was horrified by the concept. This goes against every principle of biological engineering. These systems will waste energy, create unnecessary inflammation, and probably damage the host organisms. That is the point, Jake explained. Human immune systems do all of those things, and they work because pathogens cannot predict their responses. The first tests were disasters. Their chaotic defense systems attacked healthy tissue, ignored actual threats, and generally created more problems than they solved. Thane's patterns grew darker with each failure. "This proves my point," he said after the fifth failed experiment. "Chaos is not a solution. It is just another way to fail." But Jake had noticed something in the data that Thane missed. "Look at experiment 3. The defense system attacked the wrong target, but look what happened to the plague sample." Thane examined the data more closely. It retreated? But the defense was not even aimed at it. Exactly. The plague could not predict what the chaotic system would do next, so it pulled back rather than risk exposure to an unknown threat. This discovery led to their breakthrough. Working with Dr. Helen Brooks via quantum communication, Jake began developing a hybrid approach that combined Nereid biological engineering with human immune system principles. The key was creating defenses that were partially chaotic, systems that would respond to threats in ways that could not be predicted or anticipated. But their research was interrupted by urgent news from the front lines. 3 more Nereid systems had fallen to the plague, and the infection rate was accelerating. Queen Lysara called an emergency meeting in the war room, a vast chamber where real-time displays showed the current state of the Empire. "The situation is deteriorating faster than our worst projections," Admiral Torrent reported, his patterns showing the deep blue of despair. "At this rate, the plague will reach our core systems in 6 weeks, not 3 months." Jake studied the tactical displays, noting the plague's spread pattern. "It is not spreading randomly. Look at these routes. It is following your most important trade and communication lines." "Of course," Queen Lysara said. "Those routes carry the highest concentration of biological technology. But it is also learning your strategic thinking. Every time you reinforce a system or evacuate a population, the plague shifts its approach to counter your moves." Admiral Torrent's patterns flared with anger. "Are you suggesting we should not defend our people?" "I am suggesting that your defenses are too predictable. The plague has learned to think like Nereids, which means it can anticipate your military strategies." Jake moved to the central display, highlighting several systems that appeared to be safe. "What if we tried something completely illogical? Instead of defending your most important systems, what if we deliberately expose them while secretly fortifying systems that appear less valuable?" The room fell silent. Queen Lysara's patterns shifted through several colors before settling on. What Jake had learned meant deep thought. "You want us to sacrifice our core worlds as bait?" "Not sacrifice. Use them as a trap. The plague expects you to defend what is most important to you. What if we let it think it is winning while we prepare? A counterstrike from an unexpected direction." Admiral Torrent's patterns flashed with outrage. "This is madness. We cannot abandon entire star systems on the hope that some chaotic strategy might work." But Queen Lysara was studying the tactical displays with new interest. "Captain Morrison, what exactly are you proposing?" Jake had been working on this idea since discovering the plague's predictive capabilities. "The plague has learned to counter logical Nereid responses, but it has never encountered human military doctrine. What if we combined your biological defenses with human tactical principles, such as controlled chaos, strategic unpredictability, the willingness to accept short-term losses for long-term gains, and most importantly, the ability to make decisions based on intuition rather than pure logic?" Jake outlined his plan. They would use the chaotic defense systems he had developed with Thane, but deploy them in a pattern that mimicked human military tactics rather than Nereid strategic doctrine. Instead of trying to save every system, they would deliberately sacrifice some to mislead the plague about their true objectives. The centerpiece of the plan was an assault on the plague's source, a massive bioship that had been identified as the primary vector for the city beneath the waves was unlike anything Jake Morrison had ever imagined. As the deep current descended through the crystal-clear waters of Aquatica, he pressed his face to the viewing wall and stared in wonder at the sprawling metropolis. Below, buildings grew like coral formations, stretching for miles in every direction. Some reached toward the surface like underwater mountains, while others spread horizontally across the ocean floor like vast gardens of living architecture. "Welcome to the First Deep," Navigator Reef said, swimming alongside Jake's viewing chamber. "Home to 50 million Nereids and the seat of our empire." Jake could see the inhabitants moving through the water between buildings, their forms graceful and fluid in their natural environment. Ships that looked like giant fish moved through designated channels, while smaller vessels darted between the structures like schools of bright fish. Everything glowed with soft bioluminescence, creating a city of living light in the ocean depths. "How long has this city existed?" Jake asked. "Over 2,000 years, Coral replied, "though it has grown significantly since Queen Lysara came to power 3 centuries ago." The deep current settled into what appeared to be a massive docking facility carved into the side of an underwater mountain. Jake felt the ship shudder slightly as it connected to the dock, and then everything went still. After 15 days of constant motion, the sudden silence felt strange. "Queen Lysara will see you tomorrow," Reef informed him. "Tonight you will rest in the palace guest chambers. Your audience is scheduled for the morning tide." Jake was escorted through a series of transport tubes filled with breathable liquid that somehow allowed him to move and breathe normally. The sensation was disturbing at first, but he quickly adapted. The Nereids had designed the guest quarters for air breathing, species though everything still had the organic, flowing design that characterized their architecture. His room was larger than his quarters on the ship, with walls that showed real-time images of the ocean outside. Schools of alien fish swam past his windows, and in the distance he could see the lights of other districts. A meal was waiting for him, along with what appeared to be formal clothing designed for humans, but made from Nereid materials that shifted color with his movements. That night, Jake lay in his strange waterbed and stared at the ceiling, which showed a view of the ocean surface far above. 2 moons crossed the alien sky, casting silver light through the water. Tomorrow he would finally meet the alien queen, who had requested a human as her prize, and he still had no idea what she wanted from him. He woke to the sound of musical chimes that seemed to come from the walls themselves. A Nereid servant brought him breakfast and helped him dress in the formal garments. The clothing felt strange but comfortable, and he noticed that it seemed to regulate his body temperature automatically. The journey to the throne room took him through corridors that were more like underwater canyons, with walls that rose hundreds of feet above his transport tube. Other Nereids watched him pass with curious eyes, their bioluminescent patterns shifting as they communicated with each other in their light language. Jake realized he was probably the first human most of them had ever seen. The throne room was vast beyond imagination, a natural cavern that had been shaped and expanded over centuries. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above, while the floor was covered with what looked like living coral that glowed in patterns that moved like slow music. At the center of the chamber sat a throne that appeared to be carved from a single, massive pearl, surrounded by pools of water that reflected the bioluminescent displays. Queen Lysara was waiting for him. Jake had seen her image during the tournament, but seeing her in person was something entirely different. She was tall and elegant, with the same pale blue skin as her people, but marked with intricate patterns that glowed with their own inner light. Her 4 arms moved independently as she gestured, each motion fluid and precise. Her silver eyes fixed on Jake as he approached, and he felt like she was seeing directly into his thoughts. "Captain Morrison," she said, and her voice filled the chamber like the sound of waves on a distant shore. "Welcome to Aquatica. I trust your journey was comfortable?" Jake stopped at what he hoped was an appropriate distance and tried to remember the greeting protocol Ambassador Parker had taught him. "Your Majesty, thank you for your hospitality. The journey was educational," Queen Lysara's patterns shifted to what Jake had learned indicated amusement. Educational. Yes, I imagine it was. My people tell me you asked many questions about why I requested a human. I am curious about that myself, Jake admitted. I am honored to be here, but I do not understand what I can offer that your own people cannot provide. The Queen gestured for him to come closer, and Jake noticed that several other Nereids were positioned around the chamber, though they remained in the shadows. Tell me, Captain Morrison, what do you know about the current state of galactic civilization? The question surprised him. I know that there are hundreds of species spread across thousands of worlds. Trade routes connect most inhabited systems. The major powers maintain a balance that has prevented large-scale wars for several centuries. And what do you know about how each species achieved their current level of development? Jake thought, carefully before answering. Each species seems to have followed a different path. The Draknari focused on military strength and conquest. The Vex pursued speed and efficiency. The Quantum Collective developed their mental abilities. The Crystalline Empire mastered energy manipulation. Exactly, Queen Lysara said, her patterns brightening. Each species chose a path and followed it to its logical conclusion. They became specialists, masters of their chosen field. And what path did the Nereids choose? Biological technology. Living ships, organic architecture, biotechnology integration. Correct again. We chose to enhance and modify life itself, to work with biological systems rather than against them. It has served us well for thousands of years. The Queen paused, her patterns shifting to darker colors. Until now, she gestured, and the walls of the chamber suddenly displayed images that made Jake step backward in shock. He saw Nereid cities that had been transformed into nightmare landscapes of twisted flesh and corrupted biology. Buildings that had once been beautiful coral formations were now writhing masses of diseased tissue. Ships that had once moved like graceful sea creatures now flew in erratic patterns, their hulls covered in parasitic growths. This is the Void Plague, Queen Lysara said, her voice heavy with sorrow. It appeared in our outer systems 6 months ago. It targets biological technology specifically, corrupting our greatest strength and turning it against us. Jake stared at the horrific images. How many systems has it affected? 17 so far, with more falling every week. The plague learns and adapts faster than we can develop countermeasures. Every solution we create only teaches it new ways to spread. What about the other species? Surely they can help. Queen Lysara's patterns shifted to what Jake was learning meant bitter irony. The other galactic powers have offered assistance, but their solutions all involve abandoning biological technology entirely. They want us to convert to mechanical systems, energy matrices, or quantum consciousness storage. In other words, they want us to stop being Nereids. Jake began to understand the scope of the problem. And you refuse to abandon your way of life. Would you abandon everything that makes humans human to solve a problem? The Queen asked. This is not just about technology, Captain Morrison. Biological integration is part of our very identity. Our cities, our ships, our tools, even our clothing and food. Everything we are depends on our symbiotic relationship with living systems. But surely there must be some way to fight this plague without giving up your entire civilization. We have tried everything our science can conceive, Queen Lysara said. We have consulted with the best minds from dozen other species. Every approach has failed, and with each failure, the plague grows stronger. Jake studied the images on the walls, his military mind automatically analyzing the problem. This plague, does it affect only Nereid biotechnology, or does it target all biological systems? Only our modified organisms. Natural life forms seem to be immune, which is why my people can survive in affected areas, though they cannot use any of their technology. And it learns from your countermeasures? Yes. Every defense we create, it eventually overcomes and incorporates into its own structure. It is almost as if... The Queen paused, her patterns shifting to uncertainty. As if what? As if it was designed specifically to defeat logical, systematic approaches to biological engineering. Our scientists work methodically, following established protocols and principles. The plague seems to anticipate these approaches and develop counters before we can implement them. Jake felt a chill of understanding. You think it was created by someone who knows how your people think and work. The possibility has occurred to us. But even if that is true, it does not help us solve the problem. We are too close to our own methods to see alternatives. Queen Lysara swam closer to Jake, her silver eyes intense. This is why I requested a human, Captain Morrison. Your species has something that... The emergency session of the Earth Council lasted 3 days, and by the end of it, nobody was happy with any of the options. Jake Morrison sat in the gallery watching the politicians argue, his military uniform feeling stiff and uncomfortable in the fancy government building. Through the tall windows, he could see the lights of New Geneva stretching to the horizon, but his mind was focused on the debate happening below. We cannot simply hand over one of our citizens like cargo, Senator Williams was saying, his face red with anger. This sets a terrible precedent. What happens when the next alien decides they want a human as a trophy? Ambassador Parker stood at the main podium, looking tired after days of explaining the same points over and over. With respect, Senator, we may not have a choice. The Galactic Council has made it clear that refusing this request could result in Earth being cut off from all trade routes. We would be completely isolated. Maybe that would be better, another senator called out. At least we would keep our dignity. Jake wanted to stand up and tell them all to stop arguing, but military officers did not speak in council sessions unless they were specifically asked. He looked around the gallery and saw other Defense Corps personnel, all of them probably thinking the same thing he was. The politicians could debate all they wanted, but in the end, someone would have to make the hard choice. What do we actually know about this Queen Lysara? Asked Dr. Chen, the head of Earth's Alien Research Division. What does she want with a human? Is this some kind of scientific experiment? Are we sending someone to become a lab rat? Ambassador Parker activated her holographic display, showing the image of the Nereid queen that had been recorded during the tournament. Our intelligence on the Nereids is limited. They are an aquatic species that evolved on a world covered entirely by oceans. Their technology is biological rather than mechanical, which means their ships and buildings are actually living creatures. Queen Lysara herself is over 300 years old and is considered one of the most brilliant strategic minds in the galaxy. That does not answer the question, Dr. Chen pressed. What does she want? We do not know, Parker admitted. The Galactic Council's message simply stated that she had won the right to request a human and that we have 30 Earth days to comply or face the consequences. Senator Rodriguez leaned forward in his chair. What kind of consequences are we talking about? Complete trade embargo, no access to galactic shipping lanes, no protection from hostile species. Essentially, Earth would become invisible to the rest of the galaxy. Parker's voice was grim. We have built our entire space program around galactic cooperation. Without it, we would be back to struggling just to reach our own moon. The debate continued for hours, going in circles. Some council members wanted to send a volunteer from the military. Others thought they should send a scientist or a diplomat. A few suggested they should simply refuse and deal with whatever happened next. Jake had heard enough. During the lunch break, he found Ambassador Parker in her office, staring out the window at the city below. I want to volunteer, he said without any introduction. Parker turned around, not looking surprised. I was wondering when you would show up. Alex Carter said you were thinking about it. Someone has to go, Jake said, sitting down in the chair across from her desk. And it should be someone who understands the risks. The risks, Parker repeated. Jake, we have no idea what this alien queen wants. You could be walking into a death trap, or worse. Jake had been thinking about this for 3 days, ever since he watched Queen Lysara make her strange request. I have been in death traps before. At least this time I would be going for a good reason. Parker studied his face for a long moment. The council is leaning toward sending Dr. Martinez from the Xenobiology department. He speaks 6 alien languages and has experience with interspecies communication. And if Queen Lysara wanted a scholar, that would make sense, Jake replied. But she did not ask for Earth's best scientist or diplomat. She asked for a human. Maybe she wants someone who represents what humans actually are, not what we think we should be. Before Parker could respond, her communicator chimed with an urgent message. She read it quickly, and her face went pale. What is it? Jake asked. Message from the Galactic Council. They are not giving us 30 days anymore. A Nereid ship is already on its way to Earth. It will arrive in 6 days. Jake felt his stomach drop. 6 days? Why the rush? Parker was already activating her emergency protocols, sending messages to the Defense Corps and the Council leadership. The message does not say, just that Queen Lysara has decided she wants her prize immediately. The next 6 days passed in a blur of preparation and argument. The Earth Council finally agreed to send a volunteer, but they could not agree on who. Dr. Martinez was the logical choice, but he failed the physical fitness tests required for long-distance space travel. Senator Kim volunteered herself, but the other politicians would not allow it. 3 different military officers put their names forward, including Jake. In the end, it came down to a simple fact. Jake Morrison was the only volunteer who met all the requirements. He was military-trained, physically fit, mentally stable, and experienced with alien contact. More importantly, he was willing to go. Alex Carter was not happy about it. "This is insane," he said as he helped Jake pack his gear aboard the UES, Defiance. "We do not even know if we will ever see you again." "You will," Jake said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "I have a feeling this Queen Lysara is not planning to kill me. If she wanted humans dead, there are easier ways to make that happen." Dr. Helen Brooks, the ship's medic, was running final medical checks on Jake's biosigns. She was a quiet woman with brown hair and steady hands, the kind of person you wanted around in a crisis. "Your blood pressure is elevated," she told him. "But that is normal considering the circumstances." "How are you feeling about this?" she asked. Jake thought about it. Nervous, curious, maybe a little excited. How often does someone get to be the first human to visit an alien world as an honored guest? "Is that what you think you are?" Alex asked. "An honored guest? I do not know what I am," Jake admitted, "but I guess I am about to find out." The Nereid ship arrived exactly when the Galactic Council said it would, appearing in Earth's solar system like a leviathan rising from the depths of space. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, looking more like a sea creature than a spacecraft. Its hull seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat, and bioluminescent patterns flowed across its surface like the aurora. Jake watched it approach through the viewport of the Defiance, which would escort him to the transfer point. The alien ship was easily 10 times larger than their vessel, and it moved through space with a fluid grace that made human ships look clumsy by comparison. "UES Defiance, this is the Nereid vessel Deep Current," came a voice over the communication system. The translation was perfect, but Jake could hear the musical quality of the original language underneath. "We are prepared to receive your passenger." Ambassador Parker handled the formal transfer protocols, while Jake said his goodbyes to the crew. It felt strange to be leaving Earth not as an explorer or a soldier, but as a prize won in an alien tournament. He wondered what Queen Lysara would think when she actually met him. Would he be what she expected? Would he disappoint her? The docking process was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. Instead of connecting airlocks, the Nereid ship actually absorbed the smaller human shuttle, pulling it inside like a whale swallowing a fish. Jake found himself standing in a chamber that felt more like being inside a living creature than a machine. The walls pulsed gently, and the air smelled of ocean salt and something else he could not identify. 2 Nereids were waiting for him, both wearing what looked like living clothing that shifted colors as they moved. They were taller than humans, with the same pale blue skin and silver eyes as their queen. When they spoke, their voices had the same musical quality he had heard over the communicator. "Captain Morrison," one of them said, "I am Navigator Reef, and this is Biologist Coral. We welcome you aboard the Deep Current. Queen Lysara is eager to meet you, but first we must ensure you are comfortable during the journey to our homeworld." Jake looked around the chamber, noting the way everything seemed to be alive. "How long is the journey?" 15 of your days, Reef replied. "Our biotechnology allows for faster travel than your mechanical ships, but Aquatica is far from here." They led him through corridors that felt like walking through the inside of a giant sea creature. Everything was curved and organic, with no sharp edges or straight lines. Bioluminescent panels provided light that changed color depending on the time of day. Jake could hear what sounded like a heartbeat in the walls, slow and steady. his quarters, were surprisingly comfortable, though completely alien. Instead of a bed, there was a depression in the floor filled with a substance that felt like water, but supported his weight like a mattress. The walls could display images from outside the ship, showing the stars streaming past at impossible speeds. "Why did she choose a human?" Jake asked Coral during his first meal aboard the ship. The food was strange but edible, tasting like plants that had grown underwater. The great arena of Zephyros Prime stretched across 5 miles of crystalline ground, its walls rising into the purple sky like mountains made of glass. Ships from 12 different worlds hung in the atmosphere above, each one carrying champions who had traveled across the galaxy for this moment. The Centennial Tournament happened only once every 100 years, and every species in the known galaxy wanted to prove they were the strongest, the smartest, or the most worthy of respect. Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the small Earth ship, watching the massive alien vessels through the viewport. His brown hair was cut short in military style, and his blue eyes tracked each ship with the careful attention of someone who had spent years learning to spot danger. As captain of the Earth Defense Corps, he had seen many strange things in space, but nothing like this. The Earth delegation was tiny compared to the others, just 3 people in a ship that looked like a toy next to the alien giants. "Look at the size of that thing," said Alex Carter, pointing at a ship that looked like a living creature with wings made of metal. Alex had been Jake's best friend since training academy, and his dark skin showed the tan of someone who spent time on many different planets. "The Draknari must have brought their entire royal fleet." Lisa Parker, Earth's ambassador, stood nearby wearing her formal blue uniform. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. "Size does not always matter," she said quietly. "Sometimes the smallest voice speaks the loudest truth." Jake nodded but kept watching the ships. Each one was beautiful and terrible in its own way. The Draknari vessels looked like dragons made of black metal and red fire. The crystalline ships of the Vex rang like bells when they moved. The bioships of the Nereid looked more like sea creatures swimming through space than machines built for war. Down in the arena, the first contest had already begun. A Draknari warrior the size of a building was fighting a creature that looked like living rock. The crowd cheered in sounds that no human throat could make. Some aliens roared like lions, others sang like whales, and a few made clicking noises like insects. The noise was so loud that Jake felt it in his bones. "The strength trials," Ambassador Parker said, reading from her datapad. "Each species sends their strongest fighter. The winner gets points toward the final score." Jake watched the Draknari warrior lift the rock creature over his head and throw it across the arena. The rock creature hit the wall and broke into pieces, then slowly pulled itself back together. It was not hurt, just beaten. The Draknari raised his arms and roared, and his people in the stands roared back. "Next are the intelligence trials," Parker continued. "Then strategy. Then the final contest where the top 3 species compete in something called the Test of Worth." The intelligence trials were harder to watch because they happened in sealed chambers. Huge screens showed alien minds working on problems that looked like impossible puzzles made of light and sound. Numbers and symbols flowed across the screens, faster than human eyes could follow. Jake saw representatives from the Vex, the Quantum Collective, and the Nereids working on calculations that would have taken Earth's best computers days to solve. When the Nereid representative finished her puzzle first, the crowd made sounds of surprise. The Nereids were known for being smart, but they were also known for taking their time. To see one work so fast was unusual. "Queen Lysara herself," Parker whispered, looking at her datapad. "She is competing in person. That has not happened in 300 years. Jake studied the figure on the screen. Queen Lysara moved through the water in her chamber like she was dancing. Her skin was pale blue and covered with patterns that glowed and changed color as she worked. She had 4 arms that moved independently, each one drawing different symbols in the water around her. Her face was beautiful in an alien way, with large silver eyes and features that looked almost human, but not quite. The strategy trials came next, and this time Jake could understand what was happening. It was like watching the most complicated chess game ever played, but with pieces that could move in ways that defied physics. Holographic armies fought across landscapes that changed with every move. Jake saw space battles, ground wars, and conflicts that happened in dimensions he could not even imagine. Queen Lysara won this trial too, and the crowd began to pay attention. It was rare for one competitor to win multiple events. Usually each species was best at one thing. The Draknari were strong, the Vex were fast, the Quantum Collective were smart, and so on. But the Nereid Queen was proving to be good at everything. The final trial brought the top 3 competitors together. Queen Lysara, a Draknari general named Crux, and a being from the Quantum Collective that looked like living mathematics. The test of worth was different each time, designed by the Zephyrian Emperor himself to challenge the competitors in unexpected ways. This time, the test was simple in concept, but impossible in practice. Each competitor had to design a solution to a problem that had no right answer. They were given a dying star, a planet full of innocent people, and technology that could save either the star or the people, but not both. Whatever choice they made, millions would die. General Crux chose to save the star, arguing that its death would destroy many systems. The Quantum being chose to save the people, calculating that conscious life was more valuable than stellar mass. But Queen Lysara did something different. She used the technology to move the people to a new planet, letting the star die but saving the lives. It was not what anyone expected, and it was not really within the rules, but it worked. The Zephyrian Emperor, a being so old and powerful that he rarely spoke, stood up in his crystalline throne. When he spoke, his voice came from everywhere at once, like thunder that could think. "The winner," he announced, "by right of conquest, intelligence, strategy, and wisdom, is Queen Lysara of the Nereid Empire." The crowd erupted in sounds that Jake felt more than heard. Some aliens were cheering, others were arguing, and a few seemed to be singing funeral songs. Winning the Centennial Tournament was a huge honor, and it came with a prize that could change the balance of power in the galaxy. Emperor Zephyr gestured for silence, and gradually the noise died down. "Queen Lysara," his voice echoed through the arena, "you have proven yourself worthy above all others. Name your prize, and if it is within our power to grant, it shall be yours." Jake leaned forward, along with everyone else in the arena. What would she ask for? Territory to expand her empire, advanced weapons technology, access to the restricted hyperspace lanes, the location of new worlds to colonize? Queen Lysara rose from her water-filled platform, her bioluminescent patterns shifting to colors that Jake had never seen before. When she spoke, her voice carried the sound of ocean waves and distant storms. "Great Emperor," she said, "I ask for something that has never been requested in the history of your tournaments." She paused, and the arena became so quiet that Jake could hear his own heartbeat. "Bring me a human." The silence that followed was so complete that it felt like the universe had stopped breathing. Then, slowly, sounds began to emerge from the crowd. Laughter from some species, confusion from others, and what sounded like angry buzzing from the insect-like hive collective. Jake felt his blood turn cold. Ambassador Parker grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his uniform sleeve. Alex stared at the screen showing Queen Lysara, his mouth hanging open. "Did she just—" Alex started to say. "Yes," Parker whispered. "She asked for one of us." The Emperor's voice cut through the growing noise. "This is unusual. Humans are a primitive species, barely capable of faster-than-light travel. They have no significant technology, no unique resources, and their planet holds little strategic value. Are you certain this is what you desire?" Queen Lysara's patterns shifted to what looked like determination mixed with something else Jake could not identify. "I am certain, Great Emperor. I want a human, and I want them brought to my world as soon as possible." The crowd erupted again, this time with sounds that were definitely arguments. Jake could see alien representatives talking rapidly to each other, their translators working overtime to convert the chaos into something approaching sense. Some were laughing, others were angry, and a few looked worried. "Very well," the Emperor said finally. "The Galactic Council will contact Earth and arrange for your prize to be delivered. The tournament is concluded." As the crowds began to disperse, and the great ships prepared to leave, Jake stood frozen on the observation deck. In all his years of military service, in all his time exploring the galaxy, he had never imagined that humanity would become the prize in an alien contest. Ambassador Parker was already activating her emergency communicator, trying to reach Earth. Command. Alex was running calculations on his datapad, probably figuring out how long it would take for the news to reach home. But Jake just stared at the image of Queen Lysara as she swam back to her bioship. Her alien eyes seemed to look directly at him through the screen, and for a moment he wondered if she somehow knew that he was watching. There was something in her expression that was not triumph or satisfaction. It looked almost like anticipation. Whatever the Nereid Queen wanted with a human, Jake had a feeling that life for his species was about to become very complicated.